You never felt threatened by them. That is the detail almost everyone remembers first. They were calm, composed, often charming. They said the right things. They asked good questions. They seemed to understand you. And then, at some point, you realized they had never once been affected by any of it. In the last episode, we looked at Machiavellianism, the cold, patient strategist who calculates every move. Where the Machiavellian calculates, the psychopath simply does not feel what you feel. That is not a small distinction. That is the difference between someone who chooses not to care and someone for whom caring is not a category that exists. Think of the dark triad as a temperature drop. Narcissism runs warm. It is attention-seeking, reactive, emotionally hungry. Machiavellianism runs cold, strategic, deliberate, patient. Psychopathy has no internal weather at all. Approximately 1 in every 100 people in the general population meets the criteria for subclinical psychopathy. Not serial killers, not predators in the criminal sense. People in offices, in families, in friend groups, people you have almost certainly already met. This episode is about what the research actually says they look like, and more importantly, how you recognize them before the cost becomes clear. In 1941, a psychiatrist named Hervey Cleckley published a book called The Mask of Sanity. He had spent years working with patients who were, by every visible measure, completely functional, intelligent, articulate, socially fluent, and yet they left wreckage behind them everywhere they went. Cleckley described them as wearing a mask of normalcy so convincing that even trained clinicians were regularly deceived. Decades later, forensic psychologist Robert Hare built on Cleckley's observations and developed the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, the PCLR, which became the clinical gold standard for assessing psychopathic traits. The PCLR does not measure violence. It measures 2 clusters: emotional detachment, shallow affect, lack of empathy, failure to form genuine bonds, and antisocial lifestyle, impulsivity, manipulation, using others instrumentally. Here is the definition that matters for this episode. Psychopathy is the absence of genuine emotional connection, combined with the consistent treatment of other people as objects or tools. Not rage, not cruelty for its own sake, not dramatic villainy, just a person who sees you the way most people see a chair, useful or not useful, positioned correctly or in the way. The everyday psychopath does not stab you. They use you, and they do it without a flicker of internal conflict, because there is no internal conflict to speak of. Here is where most people's intuition breaks down. We assume that someone who understands our emotions must feel them. That empathy and emotional intelligence are the same thing. They are not. The psychopathic individual is often extraordinarily skilled at reading emotional states, body language, vocal tone, micro-expressions, the specific texture of someone's vulnerability in a given moment. They have studied this, not consciously the way you study for an exam, but through years of navigating a world where emotional feedback is information rather than experience. Picture a colleague who always seems to know exactly when you are frustrated with your manager. They come to you at that precise moment, leaning in, lowering their voice, offering the specific validation you needed to hear. You feel seen. You feel understood. You trust them. And 3 weeks later, you discover that every frustration you shared has been quietly relayed upward, framed, positioned, and used to make you look unstable and them look indispensable. They read you perfectly. They felt nothing doing it. This is what Cleckley called the mask, not a disguise the person consciously puts on each morning, but a seamless, habitual performance of emotional reciprocity that has no interior counterpart. If you've ever felt that someone truly understood your pain and somehow seemed entirely unchanged by it, you were not imagining the gap. You were seeing through the mask for a moment. Most people don't get even that. Psychologist Paul Babiak spent years studying psychopathic traits specifically in corporate environments. His research, detailed in the book Snakes in Suits, found that approximately 4% of senior executives and CEOs score in the psychopathic range on clinical assessments, roughly 4 times the rate in the general population. The corporate structure, Babiak argued, does not create psychopathy. It selects for it. The traits that make someone dangerous in most relationships, charm without attachment, decisiveness without guilt, the ability to cut someone loose without a second thought, read as leadership qualities in certain environments. But the workplace is only one context. Think about the friend whose support always seems to come with an invoice you only notice later. They were there for you during the hardest period of your life. They listened for hours. They showed up. And over time, you become aware that every act of care has been stored, cataloged, and withdrawn the moment you decline a favor or set a limit. The support was real. The feeling behind it was not. Or consider the family member who can recite your trauma with clinical precision, who knows every painful detail of what you went through, who can describe it back to you with startling accuracy, and has never, not once, seemed to actually carry any weight of it. They know your history the way a lawyer knows a case file. Present every fact, unmoved by any of it. Kevin Dutton's research on what he calls functional psychopathy found that certain high-pressure roles, surgeons, lawyers, special forces operatives, elite negotiators, select for people who can act with complete clarity when others would freeze from emotional overwhelm. The traits are not universally destructive, but in personal relationships where emotional reciprocity is the foundation of trust, the same traits produce a specific kind of damage, quiet, sustained, and often invisible, until it has already run deep. The boss who never apologized but always had a perfectly logical reason. The friend whose support arrives prepackaged with a hidden price. The family member who has memorized your pain without absorbing a single gram of it. These are not dramatic events. They are patterns. And patterns are what the research teaches you to read. There is a test for this, and you already have the data. The first signature is consequence-free harm. When something they do causes pain to another person, there is no distress, no guilt that changes behavior. They may offer an explanation, even an apology in form, but the behavior continues unchanged. Remorse, for most people, is corrective. It feeds back into decisions. For the psychopathic individual, it is a social performance with no upstream effect. The second signature is calibrated charm. Their warmth tracks your usefulness. When you have something they need, access, information, social standing, emotional labor, they are engaged, attentive, present. When you no longer provide that, the temperature drops without explanation and without transition. There is no falling out. There is no conflict. You simply become less relevant, and they move on as though the relationship had always been primarily logistical. The third signature is emotional asymmetry. You leave interactions carrying weight they do not carry. You spend hours processing a conversation that they forgot within minutes. You feel the full emotional mass of the dynamic. They feel none of it. This asymmetry is not accidental. It is structural. And once you name it, you will find you have felt it before. In at least one relationship you have spent a long time trying to understand. Here is what the research does not prepare you for. Recognizing these 3 signatures does not make the pattern less confusing in real time, because the mask is not worn consciously. There is no villain rehearsing their performance in the mirror. There is simply a person for whom your internal experience is not data that registers. Your pain is information, not weight. What do you do with this? First, stop searching for the moment they will finally feel it. The moment where the impact lands and changes them. That moment is not coming. Not because they are incapable of change in every sense, but because the feedback loop that produces change in most people does not function the same way here. Waiting for genuine remorse is not a strategy. It is a sentence. Second, track behavior, not explanations. The psychopathic individual is often skilled at generating plausible accounts for any single incident. What they cannot sustain across time is a pattern of genuine reciprocity. Look at the last 6 months, not the last conversation. Does the balance of who carries emotional weight ever actually shift? That question will tell you more than any individual exchange. Third, and this matters, if you are in a situation where naming this pattern or setting a limit could put you at risk, professionally, financially, or personally, your safety comes first. Before any framework in this episode, a professional can help you assess and plan with the full context of your specific situation. You were not wrong to trust them. The mask exists specifically because it works. Cleckley spent a career documenting how consistently it deceives trained clinicians. You were dealing with something practiced and invisible. Now, you see it. We have now looked at all three corners of the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy. But here is what we have not examined yet. What happens when these traits combine? A psychopath with narcissistic features, someone who lacks empathy, but also craves recognition and reacts to perceived slights. A Machiavellian with psychopathic affect, someone with the patience of a long strategist and the emotional detachment of someone who does not register your suffering as a cost. The combinations are not just additive, they are exponential, and they are what the next episode maps. The dangerous blends, the patterns that are hardest to name, hardest to leave, and hardest to explain to anyone who has not lived inside one. That is next. The mask was never the most dangerous thing about them. The most dangerous thing was how normal everything looked while they were wearing it.